Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm really excited about today's topic because we're tackling a city that I think holds a special place in a lot of people's imaginations. We're diving into London.
Ah, London.
Based on your interest in sort of getting a handle on what makes these major global cities tick, and we've got a really great selection of travel guides and cultural overviews here, all aimed at giving us the real essence of London.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see how different sources capture the spirit of a place.
Exactly. And our mission today, without getting bogged down in too many details, is to figure out, well, first of all, what makes London unique, right? What sets it apart?
Mm-hmm.
And also, what makes it such a draw for so many people? Why is it considered such a must-visit destination?
Yeah, what is that enduring appeal?
Exactly. So have you ever thought about, like, how a city can be so steeped in history, centuries of history, but at the same time be this global trendsetter?
It's a fascinating paradox.
It really is. Okay, so let's start unpacking this, shall we?
Let's do it.
Now, one of the first things that strikes me about London is this really interesting blend of, well, you could almost call it old and new, but it's more than that.
It's a layering, I think, like an archaeological dig almost.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, I mean, think about this, right? You could be walking down a street in London and literally be on the same path that Roman soldiers marched on 2,000 years ago, back when it was Londinium.
Right, in 43 AD.
Yeah. And then you look up and you see this, gleaming skyscraper like the Shard piercing the skyline.
It's quite the juxtaposition.
It is. It's almost a bit of a time warp. So how does a city manage to pull off that kind of a historical balancing act?
Well, I think it's in part a deeply ingrained respect for history,
Mm.
a sense of continuity. Instead of just erasing the past and building over it, they've found ways to integrate those different layers, to let them coexist, even converse with each other.
So it's not just about preservation. It's about incorporating those historical elements into the modern fabric of the city.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this approach doesn't just apply to the physical landscape, to the buildings, but also to the way Londoners think and approach things.
Yeah. There's this sense of innovation and evolution, but it's built on a foundation of history and tradition.
Right. You see it in their art, in their fashion, in their business practices. There's this underlying thread of continuity that connects the past to the present.
Okay. So we've got this sort of temporal depth, right? The sense of history layered upon history. But then there's another dimension to London that really makes it stand out, and that's its cultural diversity.
Absolutely. When you talk about global hubs, London is the quintessential example. It's a city that's been shaped by waves of immigration for
Yeah,
centuries.
yeah. I mean, it's incredible to think about the sheer number of cultures and communities that have come together there.
The last time I checked, it was over 300 languages spoken in London.
300 languages.
Over 300. That's more than most countries.
That's just mind-blowing. And it's not just a statistic, right? You actually feel that diversity as you move through the city.
You do. Every neighborhood has its own distinct character, its own vibe, its own flavors.
Yeah, you can walk down one street and be in Chinatown, then hop on the tube and suddenly find yourself in Brick Lane with its vibrant South Asian culture and amazing food.
Oh, the food.
Right. And then there's Camden with its eclectic markets and that kind of, alternative energy.
It's this incredible tapestry woven from threads of all these different cultures.
It really is. Okay, so we've got this historical depth, this cultural richness, but, I think it's also worth taking a moment to just acknowledge the sheer weight of history that London carries.
Yeah, it's not a city that just popped up overnight. It's been a major player on the world stage for millennia, really.
And it's been through so much. The Roman invasion, the Norman conquest, the rise and fall of the British Empire, 2 world wars.
And through it all, it's continued to evolve and adapt, to reinvent itself.
And all of those pivotal moments have left behind these really incredible landmarks, these testaments to the city's history.
They really are.
So let's talk about some of those, starting with, I think, one of the most iconic, the Tower of London.
The Tower.
Yeah.
You can't talk about London without mentioning the Tower. It's been standing there since 1066, a witness to almost 1,000 years of history.
Can you imagine the stories those walls could tell?
I know. And it's not just one story, right? It's been a royal palace, a prison, a treasury, a menagerie, even an observatory at one point.
It's had quite the career.
It has. And of course, today it's home to the crown jewels, which are just Dazzling.
literally glittering with history.
Exactly.
And then there's Buckingham Palace, arguably the most famous royal residence in the world.
It's the working headquarters of the monarchy, but it's
Yeah.
also the symbol of British tradition and pageantry.
And of course, there's the changing of the guard ceremony, which is such a draw for tourists.
Oh, it's a spectacle. It's so quintessentially British.
And then just a stone's throw away, you have Westminster Abbey.
Ah, Westminster Abbey. It's where every British monarch since 1066 has been crowned.
Can you imagine the weight of history in that building?
Wow, it's like stepping back in time. And it's not just coronations, right? It's also the final resting place for so many influential figures.
Monarchs, poets, scientists.
Isaac Newton is buried there, Charles Darwin, Charles Dickens. It's a who's who of British history.
It really is. Okay, so we've talked about London's historical landmarks, but it's not just a museum piece, right? It's also this incredibly vibrant center for arts and culture.
Oh, absolutely. London is consistently ranked as one of the top cultural capitals in the world.
And for good reason. I mean, the sheer number of theaters, galleries, museums, it's just mind-boggling.
And so many of the major museums are free.
Yeah, which is incredible when you think about the treasures they hold. Take the British Museum, for instance.
The British Museum is just a treasure trove of global history and culture. You've got the Rosetta Stone, the Elgin Marbles, artifacts from every corner of the world.
It's like a crash course in human civilization.
It really is. And then you've got world-class art institutions like the National Gallery and the Tate Modern.
And of course, for theater lovers, there's nothing quite like London's West
Well,
End.
it's the heart of British theater. You've got everything from long-running musicals like Les Mis and The Lion King to cutting-edge new plays. And then there's the Globe, of course.
Shakespeare's Globe. That must be quite an experience, seeing a play in that reconstructed open-air theater.
It's like stepping back into Shakespeare's time.
And we can't talk about London's cultural scene without mentioning music.
Oh, London's musical legacy is huge. I mean, it's been at the forefront of so many musical movements, from the British invasion to punk rock to grime.
Yeah, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Clash, Amy Winehouse, this goes on and on.
And you've got these iconic studios like Abbey Road, which are practically pilgrimage sites for music fans. It's really remarkable when you think about the impact London has had on global music trends.
It really is. Okay, so we've talked about history, culture. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about architecture, because London's skyline is this really interesting mix of old and new.
It is. You've got these grand historical buildings like the Houses of Parliament with Big Ben, which are just so iconic.
And then there's Westminster Abbey, of course, and St. Paul's Cathedral, which is such a masterpiece. It's incredible to think that it was rebuilt after the Great Fire of 1666.
Yeah, talk about resilience.
It's a symbol of London's ability to overcome adversity and rebuild itself.
It really is. And then alongside these historical giants, you have these striking modern buildings.
Like the Shard, right, which we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the Gherkin, the Walkie-Talkie, the Lloyd's building with its inside-out design.
They're all pushing boundaries and creating this really interesting dialogue between the past and the present.
And then there's the London Eye, which offers this incredible panoramic view of the city.
It's a great way to get a sense of the scale of London and to see how all these different elements fit together.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different aspects of London, but we can't forget about its royal connections. I mean, London is a city steeped in royal history and tradition.
It is. Royal London is a huge draw for visitors. And it all starts with Buckingham Palace, of course, the official residence of the monarch.
And the changing of the guard ceremony, which we talked about earlier. And during the summer, you can actually visit the staterooms inside the palace.
You can. And if you want a more intimate glimpse into royal life, there's Kensington Palace, which has been home to many members of the royal family over the years.
Yeah, it's got a very different feel to Buckingham Palace, much less formal. And then just outside the city, you have Windsor Castle.
The oldest and largest inhabited castle in the world. And it's still a working royal residence. The Queen spends many weekends there.
It's amazing to think that it's been continuously inhabited for over 900 years.
It really is. It's a testament to the enduring legacy of the monarchy.
Okay, so we've talked about London's history, its culture, its architecture, its royal connections. But one thing that often surprises people is how green London is.
It's true. London has an amazing amount of green space for such a large, densely populated city.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Hyde Park, which is one of the largest urban parks in the world.
With the Serpentine, where you can go boating, and Speaker's Corner, where you can hear all sorts of interesting opinions.
And then there's Regent's Park, which is famous for its beautiful rose gardens, and of course, London Zoo.
A great place for families. And for some of the best views of the city, there's Greenwich Park.
Home to the Royal Observatory, where you can stand on the Prime Meridian line. That's pretty cool.
It is. And if you really want to escape the city bustle, there's Richmond Park, which is more like a country estate than a city park.
With herds of deer roaming freely. It's amazing to think that you can have that kind of experience so close to a major city.
It is. London's green spaces are one of its real treasures.
Okay, so we've touched on London's multiculturalism, but I think it's worth delving a bit deeper into its culinary scene, which is a direct result of that diversity.
Oh, London's food scene is incredible. You can find virtually any type of cuisine you can imagine there, and often the quality is outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Brick Lane earlier, which is the go-to spot for amazing Indian and Bangladeshi food.
Absolutely. And Borough Market is a must-visit for foodies. It's this sprawling market with stalls selling fresh produce, artisanal cheeses, baked goods, street food from all over the world. It's a feast for the senses.
It sounds amazing. And then there are areas like Soho and Covent Garden, which are packed with restaurants of all kinds.
From Michelin-starred restaurants to cozy pubs to trendy pop-ups, there's something for everyone.
And speaking of pubs, you can't talk about London's culinary scene without mentioning its historic pubs.
Oh, the pubs are an institution. They're like little time capsules, often with centuries of history behind them.
Yeah, places like the Georgian or Ye Old at Cheshire Cheese, they're not just places to grab a drink, they're part of the fabric of the city.
They really are. They're where locals gather, where stories are shared, where traditions are kept alive.
Okay, so for those who are interested in shopping, London is a retail paradise.
It is. You've got everything from high street fashion to luxury boutiques to quirky independent shops.
Yeah, if you're looking for department stores and big-name brands, Oxford Street is the place to go.
And for high-end shopping, there's Harrods and Bond Street.
And for something a bit different, there are London's many markets.
Like Portobello Road, which is famous for its antiques.
And Camden Market, which has a more alternative vibe with lots of vintage clothing, crafts, and street food.
And Covent Garden, which is a great mix of shops, restaurants, and street performers.
And Greenwich Market, which is known for its independent designers and artisan goods.
So much to see and do.
Okay, so let's say someone has limited time in London and wants to hit the absolute must-see attractions. What would you recommend?
Ooh, that's a tough one. But I'd say the Tower of London is a must for its history and its sheer iconic status.
Definitely.
The British Museum is essential for its incredible collection of global artifacts.
Absolutely.
The Houses of Parliament and Big Ben are just so iconic you can't miss them.
Agreed.
Buckingham Palace is a must for its royal connections and the changing of the guard ceremony.
Makes sense.
The London Eye offers the best views of the city.
For sure.
St. Paul's Cathedral is a masterpiece of architecture and a symbol of London's resilience.
Can't argue with that.
And the Tate Modern is a must for contemporary art lovers.
Great list. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think it's fun to throw in a few random facts about London that people might not know.
I love random facts.
Me too. So for instance, did you know that the London Underground, the Tube, is the oldest underground railway network in the world?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it opened in 1863,
That's amazing.
and London has over 170 museums.
Wow.
So many museums. And they're not all about history and art. There's a fan museum, a museum of brands, packaging, and advertising.
You can find a museum for just about anything in London.
It seems that way. And did you know that the Millennium Bridge, that pedestrian bridge across the Thames, was featured in a Harry Potter movie?
Oh, right. The one that gets destroyed by the Death Eaters.
That's the one. And here's a fact that might surprise you. London actually gets less rain than Rome and New York.
Really? I always thought London was super rainy.
It's got a reputation, but it's not actually as rainy as you might think.
That's good to know.
So there you have it. London in a nutshell.
Or maybe London in a pint glass, considering all the pubs we talked about.
That's a good one. But seriously, London is a city that defies easy categorization. It's a place where history and modernity collide and coexist, where tradition and innovation go hand in hand, where you can find pretty much anything you can imagine.
It's a city that's constantly evolving, reinventing itself, but always with a nod to its past. And it's that unique blend of old and new, of tradition and innovation that makes it so fascinating.
It does. So we've given you a lot to think about today, but I think this raises an interesting question. In a world that's constantly changing, what is it about cities like London that allows them to remain relevant and captivating across centuries?
That's a good question.
What is it about these global hubs that makes them so enduring? It's something to ponder. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for London and its unique place in the world. Maybe it's even inspired you to add it to your travel list.
It's a city that everyone should experience at least once.
I think so too. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into London. We'll see you next time.